Howdy everybody, I'm Lulnenko. I'm going to be going over the patch 67.4 notes for Storybook Brawl. You can find these on the Steam page for the game, and I'm going to be giving my thoughts on each change quickly. So, Midas. The change here is that Midas can now find quest units. You can now find the quest units in the shop, and they give treasures. It's a bit of a buff to the hero for sure. Not a strict buff because it changes your minion pool a little bit, and now it can be diluted with cards you don't necessarily want, like Princess White. But with the Princess White buff that we'll see in a little bit, I'm a bit interested to try going dwarves on this hero, and I think that getting Brave Princess is a nice addition, as Brave Princess is one of the strongest tier 3 units in my opinion. But I'm not too thrilled about the idea of getting the other quest units. They're a bit understated. Cinderella's pretty fine, but you're not too excited by tier 2 treasures most of the time. I think King Midas goes from very bad to pretty bad. I still don't expect this hero to see that much play. Sphinx now doesn't have an extra spell in the shop. This isn't going to decrease the Sphinx high rolls that much. If you get Crystal Ball early, you're still going to be able to play an obscene amount of free spells. It'll be a little bit more limited because you'll have to roll more, but it's still going to be disgusting. However, I think the average roll of Sphinx gets much worse, and overall this hero is going to drop to feeling just okay, I think. But keep in mind, if you do play this hero early, or if you're playing against it within a few days of the patch, your initial impression might be skewed because I think it's going to be a very high variance hero. Card changes. So those are all our hero changes. Good Boy is being changed to only give other good characters attack and health. So the effect is functionally the same for front Good Boy strategies, but if you are trying to use Copycat with Good Boy, if you're trying to Trophy Hunter Good Boy, or if you're resummoning it with something like Phoenix Feather, you are no longer getting the buff from Good Boy onto itself. This is going to be a huge nerf for Copycat Good Boy. I sort of feel like this is my doing to an extent. I didn't invent the Copycat Good Boy strategy by any means, but I think I kind of popularized it. So a lot of people are asking me, is Copycat dead? Are you still going to play Copycat? And I think we'll find that Copycat is still a pretty strong card with things like Monster Book and Crocs. We might be putting pumpkins in Crocs. We'll see there's a pumpkin change coming up. Overall, I think Copycat becomes still a playable card, but no longer an instant pick on tier 4. And Good Boy is something you're still going to pick up on tier 6 if it happens to be good with what else you have. Maybe you already have a bunch of good cards, but you no longer have this crazy endgame trump card of the Copycat Good Boy. And Trophy Hunter also gets toned down a little bit, which is nice because sometimes their end games were just seemingly unbeatable. Friendly Spirit gets the same change. My comments on this are going to be mostly the same. It nerfs Copycat. Friendly Spirit strategies a little bit, but it's still a fine thing to do in the mid game. Friendly Spirit loses a lot of the high rolls because a lot of the time it buffing itself was like a luck roll that you're hoping to have, and it's a significant nerf to Trophy Hunter, which is I think something that a lot of people were looking for because it's just a frustrating hero to lose to sometimes. Now I think I kind of expected these changes, especially to Good Boy. If you had asked me a couple weeks ago before they even were testing any of these changes, what do I think the Good Boy change will be? This is pretty much what I expected, so I'm not too beat up about this. I think a lot of people expect me to be more sad about it since I'm pretty well known for playing Copycat Good Boy strategies, but ultimately I expected it and I think it's a fair change. Jormungand now has its current ability, but also gets, whenever another one of your characters triggers a slay ability, get +20/+20 this brawl, which does not count as triggering an additional slay on the Yorm. That's something worth knowing for Shadow Assassins, Bounty Board, etc. But this is just a nice, strict buff to Jormungand. I don't see how this ever does anything but just helps slay comps transition from sort of mid-game power into the end. If you are running something like Grim Souls with Lancelot and Baba Yaga, now you have some direction for that other than just trying to go for some big shoulder fairies or something. So it's a slay endgame strategy that actually has some meat to it. I like it, but I think it's a bit counterintuitive in that the slay ability on Jormungand actually can eat your Grim Soul triggers now in a way that you don't want it to. If you have Grim Soul and Jormungand, now you actually would really prefer the Grim Soul to hit your other slay unit, because then Jorm still gets the +20/20. So I think this card would be stronger if they removed its slay. Kind of strange to think about it that way, but that's my initial impression. Still, I think this is going to be a very powerful unit, but sort of the mid-game slay units are already not that good, so you're only going to be able to take this in some smaller portion of your games, but it will be pretty good when the stars align for it. Bossy has returned. It's now a tier 5/6/6 that gives your dwarves +3/3. I think it's nice to give dwarves a little bit more to them. In this previous patch, we kind of saw the only dwarf strategies being high attack Tweedledees or the end game Lordy. You could pivot into dwarves if you got an early Lordy. So having a Bossy smooths out that curve a little bit. I like it. How relevant the +3/3 is on tier 5, it's a bit too early for me to say, but I think this is going to be a pretty strong dwarfed card, and I think dwarves are going to be in a much healthier spot now. Princess White now gives dwarves in your shop +1/2, and the way it works is that if you buy the dwarf from the shop when you have the white, the dwarves have those buffs permanently. They compare it to the fairy tale buff in the patch notes. So this is a significantly stronger version of Princess White. She doesn't need to be on the board. The buff is permanent. You don't have to have her live until the end of the combat, and it's just more stats than before. It's +1/2 instead of 1/1. So I think this is a huge nerf to Princess White, or a huge buff rather. I think it's a huge buff to Princess White. I think dwarves get a lot better. I think this card probably becomes not just pickable but good, and I think it's going to be especially good on King Midas, who now has access to quest units and more dwarves as Bossy has returned. So I think dwarves will be a strong strategy going forward. Pumpkin King. Pumpkin King has moved from level 6 to 5. It's become a 2/2 instead of a 10/10. And note that it can never summon itself. So it's kind of a strange change to me. I didn't see this one coming. I mean, I knew they were testing something like this, but I was still surprised. It's kind of removing the late game evil strategy, I think, or at least it's changing the way that evil works in the late game, where you're kind of building towards a pumpkin strategy and going end game, something like Doom Breath, Golden Pumpkin, maybe some Oni Kings, maybe Grumblegore. Now Pumpkin King being a 5, it's summoning a 4 from itself when it dies. It's got lower stats itself, but you can get it out earlier. You can take it as more of a tempo unit, where maybe you're getting it even 3 turns earlier than you would have before. Sometimes you're going to be buying this just as a temporary thing that deals a bunch of damage to your opponents. Something that's worth knowing about Pumpkin King, honestly, is that it just summons a lot of units when it dies, and that can deal a lot of hero damage to the opponent. So I think we're going to see a lot of pumpkins being picked up on the turn, well, as soon as possible, I would say. The turn you hit tier 5, or if you find it before that even. And it's going to really wreck lobbies. I don't think it's a strong late game necessarily. I think there's going to be much stronger late game comps like mages, but I think it has the possibility, if you get it out early enough, to deal a lot of damage to your opponents. Shoulder fairies. It now gets the stats at the end of your shop phase so that the buffs don't go on to your Echo Wood. Essentially, it's a change to just make it so that the stats can't go on to the Echo Wood. It's a huge change to how these Shoulder Fairies comps are played. I think this sort of endgame comp where you just go for big Shoulder Fairies, big Echo Wood, I mean, it's going to have to be rethought completely. A lot of players go for this as their sort of general strategy, and that's going to be gone. You just can't buff Echo Woods from it anymore, and I think Shoulder Fairies by themselves are not going to be enough of a carry. That being said, this is still a decent card to pick up sometimes. If you happen to have a big Lancelot and a high attack Shadow Assassin, which might be something you're doing in this patch, the Shoulder Fairies might just happen to be quite large. So I think this is a fair change if the devs wanted to significantly curb that Shoulder Fairies Echo Wood strategy. But for Echo Wood fans out there, this is a huge change. Ninth book moves from tier 5 to tier 6, and they even sort of mention in the patch notes it's a quality of life move more than just a power level move. So ninth book being tier 5, it didn't necessarily feel too powerful, but it was really frustrating to lose to, especially with Mimic. It was just such a nasty thing where so many random spells are going off that it felt like you couldn't control what was happening to you in the game. So just moving ninth book to tier 6 so that you'll see it less often, I think is a good change. But I also think that we'll find that for a tier 6 treasure, it's really horrible. I think it's going to be way too late most of the time, and almost no one will pick it. It's my early prediction, at least. Horn of Olympus and Evil Eye are both going to be one tier lower than they previously were. Nobody was really picking these treasures before, but I think they're also a buff to Slay comps, and we've sort of already seen a buff to the Slay comps as I showed the Yorm change, the Jormungand change. So, you know, Baba Yaga being the main support you care about there. But there's other supports you can be running. Heartwood Elder, also known as Tree Arthur, is a good one. I think you probably still consider these treasures to be pretty highly situational. I don't think a tier 4 Horn of Olympus is so good that you're going to be building around it. I think a lot of the time you're still going to be skipping it in favor of a Ring of Rahe or something, but it's making these much more reasonable to pick up. And there's going to be times now where it shows up in your options and you're at least happy to see it. I do think, though, we're getting a significant dilution of the tier 4 pool with the addition of Horn of Olympus, which is another hit that you sometimes just don't want at all. Fancy Pants. The buff is now 2-2 instead of 2-3. Sorry, it's 3-3 instead of 2-2. I can't read. The buff from Fancy Pants is 3-3 instead of 2-2. That seems huge to me. It's an extra 50% of what it was before. I can do math. So as long as you're not buying chickens at the start of the turn, like I always would, this is pretty huge. I mean, think about your friendly spirits, think about your mummies, wombats. I mean, good boy, this is a huge amount of stats. I think Fancy Pants becomes one of the best tier 3 treasures in the game. Maybe the best tier 3 treasure in the game, maybe second best to like Crystal Ball or something. But you should be picking Fancy Pants. This is a ton of stats. As long as you get it reasonably early, this is a huge buff and it's a ton of stats. Cut, Tree of Life, Hidden Cache, Hand of Vecna, Other Hand of Vecna. So, yeah, these aren't treasures that were being picked super often. Like they say here, Tree of Life either did nothing or made a fight completely lopsided. I agree with that completely. Hidden Cache, one of the biggest problems with it is if you were summoning any sort of tokens, the buff from it would often just land on whatever you summoned during the combat, and then you got no effect out of it. You lose the stats. And Other Hand of Vecna just felt like it was insignificant most of the time, and you'd just rather have something else. So removing 2 of the not so great tier 4 treasures, adding another realistically not so great tier 4 treasure with Horn of Olympus moving down. I'll be interested to see how the tier 4 treasure pool feels now. Maybe not too much better or worse than it did. And then there's some art changes. That's going to be fine. You can decide for yourself how you feel about that. And some bug fixes. I would point out bug fixes if I thought any of these really significantly affected how you should play the game, but I don't. Mostly I'm just excited to see that there are some bug fixes for connection failures, which I was having a lot of. So good changes. I'm excited to see how all of it plays out. I think there's mostly I'm just excited for Shoulder Fairies nerfs and even the Good Boy nerf, even though I'm a big Good Boy fan. Means that I will be forced to play some different strategies a bit, and we'll get some creativity out of it. So looking forward to this patch, and let me know what you think in the comments, what you're excited to play. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I have been lulnenko, and I will see you next time.